So continuing on with our subject matter, this is a book called The Clear Statement. It is a concise explanation of something called the obligatory knowledge, which is the essential knowledge that every accountable Muslim is obligated to know. So whoever has a copy of the book, we're on page 46, second paragraph. So the part we were talking about, so this case that we got to, because we're talking about purification and prayer. So we mentioned that the prayer is an obligation to pray every day and night, and we're going to mention now that the duty of the Muslim ruler, of the caliph, which nowadays there is none. So whenever we reference the Muslim ruler or the Islamic government or the legal infrastructure of Islam, we're referring to when there is a caliph and the system is in place. But that system has not been in place for over a century now. It's been over 100 years now, since the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So the last caliph that we had was Abdul Hamid II, the caliph of the Ottoman Empire, and that empire officially came to an end at the end of World War I. So the Muslims had a caliph from right after the Prophet died, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, until the end of World War I. That's from the end of World War I until today. There's been no caliph. There's been no Muslim ruler. Now what you have is a secular rulership that's not based on what we're talking about right now. So the author said, it is obligatory on the Muslim rulers, the caliph or his deputy, to execute the person who neglects the prayer after warning him that he will be killed if he does not pray before this prayer time, and the one after it if it is a prayer that is combinable with it, for an excuse ends. This is the judgment if one neglected the prayer out of laziness or lack of concern, not out of denying its obligation. This punishment is fulfilled if that person does not repent by starting to pray before getting killed. Killing him would cleanse him from that sin. The judgment of such a person is that he is a Muslim. Therefore, he is treated as Muslim. He would be washed, shrouded, prayed for, and buried in a Muslim cemetery. As for the one who does not pray out of denying its obligation, such a person is an apostate and is treated as such. So what does this mean? So like we said, this is related to the Islamic legal infrastructure. And in the Islamic law, there are certain things that are sins, and there are certain sins that they carry a punishment, because in reality sins are crimes. So just look at it with the word crime. Aren't there certain crimes that if you do them today in the United States of America that you get the death penalty? Aren't there certain crimes that's the case? Yes, it's known. It's not a mystery. There's a thing called death row, where there's people sitting on death row that sometimes they will be sitting there for 20 years, 30 years, and then they find out, oh, DNA, they didn't do it. They were innocent the whole time. And those are the ones that I guess that they found out in time before they actually executed them. Some of them they find out afterwards. Whoops, wrong guy, executed. So that exists. So in the Islamic law, there's certain crimes that are punishable by death. One of them is for the Muslim to not pray. Not pray one of the 5 daily prayers. So if he becomes convicted of that in the Muslim court, which is also, there's a system and a process for that, either he confesses, either he goes to the Muslim judge and he says, I don't pray, or in front of witnesses, he doesn't pray. So if there's someone living within that infrastructure, and he knows that if he doesn't pray the obligatory prayer, like at that moment, at that time, and there's witnesses around, he knows that if he does that and they testify that he didn't pray, then what's going to happen to him? He's going to get brought before the Muslim judge, and then this process will happen. The Muslim judge will order him to pray, and if he doesn't pray, then he's executed. If he knows that's the case, is he going to not pray? No, he's going to pray. It takes 5 minutes. He's going to pray. And if he doesn't pray, he's going to do it like behind closed doors where nobody sees him, and he's not going to confess on his own, right? So it's not the way that the non-Muslims who want to paint a negative image of Islam and they want to fearmonger about our laws when their laws, but they're in no position to criticize our laws because their laws, of course, oftentimes are flawed, unjust, justice is not served, and it's just a whole chaotic and corrupt system. Anybody who has even like 1% knowledge of the court system or that the system that exists in the West, they know that it's horrible. So, but that's besides the point. The point is, only in a very organized way would a Muslim who doesn't pray would get convicted of that. And if he insists on not praying, like they give him a chance to pray and to repent, of course, like they just tell him right there, pray. And if he starts praying, then they leave him alone. They set him free. If he insists on not praying, then he gets executed. That's the law. That's the Islamic law. But this judgment, it is not for us that are not within that legal infrastructure, because there is no caliph. And even if there was a caliph, someone that, for example, like a random person is not allowed to go and execute him, even if there was a caliph. So it has to be in an organized way, a systematic way through the Islamic court system. And so that's the judgment, right? That Muslim would be executed for not praying, and he would still be judged as a Muslim. And since he received the punishment for that sin, that means that in the hereafter, he's not going to get judged for that, because he paid for his sin in this life. So in the next life, he's not going to get punished again. So that's what it means when he said he'll be cleansed from that sin. That's for the case where that person is judged as a Muslim, because the majority of Ahlul Sunnah, they say that if a Muslim doesn't pray out of laziness, that he's still judged as a Muslim. There's only a minority opinion in Ahlul Sunnah, which is a valid opinion. That sometimes the scholars, they have a difference of opinion about a matter that's not explicitly mentioned in the Quran or the Hadith or the consensus. And so there'll be two different opinions about it. So this minority opinion is also a valid opinion in Ahlul Sunnah, meaning we don't judge the one who goes by that opinion as a deviant. We don't judge him as outside of Ahlul Sunnah. Which is that, that minority opinion is that the one who doesn't pray, even if it's out of laziness, that he's judged as a non-Muslim. He's judged as a kafir. So that's not the stance that we have. We go according to the majority stance. But even that minority stance is not outside of Ahlul Sunnah. It's not a deviant stance. As for if a person did not pray because they don't believe that it's an obligation to pray, the 5 daily prayers, then in this case now, they have become an apostate, because it's known that Islam judges that we're obligated to pray 5 times a day. So if someone claims, I'm not obligated to pray 5 times a day, they are contradicting the rules of Islam. And whoever contradicts the rules of Islam, while knowing that this is the judgment that Muslims believe, that this is the judgment that the religion says, they exit from Islam. So in that case, that person, the apostate, he would be executed, like in the process that we mentioned, the legal process, for being an apostate, and not for being a Muslim that left out the prayer. So that's the difference with that. The next case, it is obligatory as a communal obligation on every Muslim to order his family, that is, his wife and the like, and everyone else he is able to order with prayers if they do not pray, after teaching them the rules of prayer himself or arranging for someone else to do so. Because the concept of ordering the lawful, forbidding the unlawful, this is a rule in Islam. What does it mean, ordering the lawful, forbidding the unlawful? If a Muslim, if he does something that is sinful in front of you, and you are able to prevent that sin from happening by force, and when I say able, it means that you're able to stop that sin from happening by force without it resulting in a worse sin. Sometimes you can't do anything about it by force. Right now, you can't go down to the corner store and take all the bottles of alcohol out. You're not able to do that. Why? Because what's going to happen? A bigger sin is going to happen. Which is what? That a Muslim is going to be unjustly in prison, and his family is going to suffer, and there's going to be a backlash against Muslims and people criticizing Islam, and more negative things being said about the religion, which would be blasphemy. So we're not able to do that. So we're not obligated to do that. The extremists, those who are ignorant and they don't understand the religion properly, and they have something within themselves that they have this desire to do those types of things, they're the ones who, and they do those things, and like we're saying right now, what they're doing is not applying the rules of the religion. Because yes, alcohol is forbidden. Everybody knows that. We all know that. We all know that it's forbidden to drink alcohol. But does that mean that if I'm living in America, that I'm all of a sudden going to go to the 7-Eleven and rip out all the alcohol and bomb the store? No, it doesn't mean that. That would be forbidden. It would be haram to do that. It would be sinful to do that. So these two things, they don't contradict each other. Yes, alcohol is forbidden. We know that it's forbidden. We know that it's bad. We know that it's evil. Even the non-Muslims and anyone who has dealt with alcoholism or the negative effects of alcohol, they know it's evil. But for them, it's about money, etc. So they don't really care. That's what capitalism is. They're not looking at the moral side of it. They're just looking at the money side of it. It's just about the bottom line. They just care about making the money, and they're not concerned with what it took to make that money. That's capitalism. Plain and simple. Those, what they call those billionaires and those millionaires, they're just cutthroat. That's it. Because that's how you rise and have success in that space. That's how you do it. Like, ask them all how they made their money. Most of them. I don't even know if there's even one of them who wasn't cutthroat and did something cutthroat to get their money. Even if you want to go to the history of where we're at right now, cutthroat. Just wiped out everybody and said, this is ours now. Okay. So can't point the finger at us. Don't come and point the finger at us and try to spread hatred for Islam when there are fewer people in this world that have more blood on their hands than them. And in a bad way too, and in an unjust way, and in an ugly way. So that's just history. That's just history. So anybody who knows a little bit about history, you don't even have to go that far. Just go back to the 1920s and the 1930s and the 1940s and the 1950s and the 1960s. Even as early as the 1960s. Go back to the 1960s. What kind of things that they were doing. So nobody can point the finger at us. We are people that what our concern is the afterlife. We want to obey God, and we want to avoid sin, and we, of course, are opposed to evil and to the devil and to whoever is an agent of the devil. We're not going to pretend and say that we're all the same. We're not all the same. There's good and there's evil. Good is against evil. Good does not accept evil. Good does not facilitate evil. So you can't fault me for being against something that's evil. But does that mean I'm going to go and run people over with my car in the street because I'm a Muslim? No, that's insane. Islam doesn't teach me to go and run people over with my pickup truck. You know what I mean? Islam doesn't teach me to go and take my AR and go to the supermarket and start picking people off. Islam does not teach me that. Now, the people who hate al-Islam, they want to make other people think that. They want to make people think that if there's Muslims living in society, that means that you're always going to be on high alert from, somebody blowing something up or somebody, doing something crazy like that, because they think that Islam is pushing us to do that. I literally just said right here that we're ordered to order the lawful, forbid the unlawful. If we can't change it by force, like in the case where we're not able, in a case where it leads to something worse, then it's forbidden. So that means that I'm not allowed to go into the corner store, the liquor store, and go and take all the liquor bottles out by force, or go to the supermarket and remove all the pork. I'm not allowed. So this judgment here about every Muslim, it's a communal obligation upon the Muslim to order his family or anyone who he knows that's not praying, to order them to pray. If he's able to force them to pray, like in the case where you're the parent, they're the child, even if they are like a grown-up, even if they're an adult, but you're always going to be your parent's child. So if you know that your 20-year-old son is not praying, you can force him to pray. And if the same condition applies, because usually the parent has authority over his child and he can, force him to pray. He can tell him, if you don't start praying, then I'm going to take your car keys, because he loves his car. He loves his car and he doesn't want to not have his car. So because he wants to avoid that, he's going to do it. He's going to pray. For example, this is an example of by force, where he's able to do it and where something worse doesn't come out of it. So he would have to do that. The father would have to do that, for example. In the case where you can't change it by force, then what do? What's the next step? The next step is to change it with your tongue. What does that mean, change it with your tongue? Even if we take the example of the liquor store, if I go to the owner of the convenience store and I say, hey, alcohol is it's toxic, it damages society, it destroys the person, it destroys communities, it causes murder, it causes perverse sexual acts like incest and all these types of things. If a person drinks too much alcohol, they'll do wild and crazy things. So if I go and I speak to him and I, in a good way and in a nice way, and I'm persuasive, will he listen? He might. It's hypothetically possible. But what's the likelihood? He's probably going to curse me and kick me out of the store, probably ban me from the store, probably tell me never to come in ever again. So I wouldn't be able to change it with my tongue. And then what's the next step after that? Is you hate it in your heart. You don't condone it in your heart. So every time you see, for example, the alcohol there, you just, in your heart, you're against it. You're opposed to it. And that, nobody can come and accuse you of a crime for that. It's your heart, it's your prerogative, nobody can come and say, you have to accept this, or you have to, in the moral sense, that you have to morally accept this. Nobody can come and do that. Why are you going to force me to be okay with something like that? You can't do that. So that's the true Islam. Not what the extremists and these deviant groups, not what they propagated, not what they teach. The next thing we're going to mention now is something called ablution, wudu. So the author said, among the conditions of the validity of the prayer is wudu, which is using water on specific parts of the body initiated with an intention. So that's the definition of wudu, ablution. Using water on specific parts of the body initiated with an intention. So if someone were to ask you, what is the definition of ablution? That's the definition. Now the integrals of wudu are 6. So what does it mean when we say integral? When we say integral, it means that it is a component of the act without which the act would be invalid. So that means that in order for the wudu, the ablution, to be valid, these 6 things must happen. And remember, this is according to Al-Imam al-Shafi'i. So the integrals of wudu are 6. The first integral is the intention of purification for the prayer in one's heart, or any other valid intention, like intending making wudu or the obligatory wudu, or intending to make permissible that which requires wudu, like intending to make the prayer or touching the Quran permissible for one. It is not sufficient to say the intention with one's tongue without having it in one's heart. Also, it is not sufficient to intend performing tahara, purification only. The intention must occur when washing one's face, that is, when washing the first part of the face, not before or after that. It is a requirement that the intention accompanies washing one's face according to an Imam al-Shafi'i. May Allah raise his rank. However, it suffices if the intention to make wudu preceded washing the face by a short time, according to Al-Imam Malik, the son of Anas. May Allah raise his rank. So, the intention, right, is something that happens in the heart. And it's something that does not require a visualization of words. So you don't have to, let's say, hear yourself in your head say, I now intend to make wudu. What the intention is the reason or the motive behind what you're doing. So if you're standing in front of the sink with your sleeves rolled up because you know that the prayer time is in and you want to pray, and you just finished using the bathroom, for example, what's the reason that you're getting this water and washing your hands with your wrist, for example, doing the sunnah? And what's the reason that you're washing your face? Is it because you want to exfoliate? No. Is it because you want to cool down? No. Is it because you just want to freshen up you're feeling sleepy and groggy, so you want to, get some, wake yourself up? No. The reason you're doing this is because you want to pray. That's the intention. Another way to explain it is, think about when you're sitting on the couch, for example, and you feel thirsty, and you remember that you have an ice cold drink in the fridge, a nice cold bottle of water in the fridge. So now you remember that you have it and you're thirsty, so what do you want to do? You want to go get it. Before you get up off of the couch, do you say to yourself, I now intend to go to the kitchen and get an ice cold bottle of water? No, you don't do that. You don't do that. You just immediately know what it is that you want to do and you go do it. That's the intention. And why did you get up off of the couch? Why did you go to the kitchen? Why did you open the fridge? Because your intention is to grab this bottle of water because you're thirsty. So when it's time to pray, and you just used the bathroom, for example, and you're standing in front of the sink with your sleeves rolled up, what is the reason that you're washing your face because you're making wudu. That is the intention. Now, that intention has to be present in the heart when the water first touches your face. It does not mean that you have to insert the intention in sync with when the water first touches your face. So some people, they misunderstand that and they think that you have to time the insertion of the intention in your heart with the touching of the water to the face, which is not the case. You could have the intention from the moment that you got up off of the couch and you headed over to the sink, and then when you put the water on your face, you still had that intention. That's fine. As long as when you first started washing your face, the intention was already there. That's all that means. It just means that your heart cannot be devoid of an intention when you start washing your face. Because according to Al-Imam al-Shafi'i, it has to be the case that you have that intention when you first start washing your face. Now, that's why the author of the book, he mentioned the judgment according to Imam Malik, that he says, even if your heart was devoid of the intention when the water first touched your face, but you had the intention a short time before that, that's also valid. Because that closes the door for the whispers. Right? Aren't there some people who they have been plagued with whispers, and so they think they didn't have the intention, so they're splashing water on their face like 50 times. They splash the water on their face and they say, oh, I didn't have the intention. They splash the water on their face, oh, I didn't have the intention. They splash the water on their face, they didn't have the intention. Because they have the whispers. So in order to close that door, the author mentioned that judgment according to Imam Malik, radiyallahu anhu, so that the person knows that, if 2 seconds ago, 5 seconds ago, a minute ago, didn't you have the intention to make wudu? Yes. So you don't have to worry. When you splash the water on your face, when you went to wash your face, you don't have to think, oh, did I have the intention, did I not have the intention? Yeah, you did. Because you just had it a minute ago. So that's what that's about. Now, what is an example of a valid intention? This is just to give it an example. It doesn't mean that you have to say these words. But an example of a valid intention is, I'm intending to make wudu. So the term wudu, that's in your intention, that's valid. Or I'm intending to make the prayer permissible. Because if you are not on a state of ritual purity, if you're on a state of minor ritual impurity, then your prayer won't be valid. Because one of the conditions for the validity of the prayer is that you have to be on ritual purity. Either by making ghusl, if you had a major ritual impurity, or by making wudu, if you had a minor ritual impurity. So, and that's why you have to make wudu. But you cannot have the intention of purification only. So you cannot have in your heart that I'm just going to purify myself. Because specifically the reason that the scholars of the Islamic law, that they mention that you can't, is because purifying yourself, it's not specific to this specific washing for the prayer. Because you can purify yourself, and purifying yourself is not specific to wudu. You can purify yourself in other ways or for other things. So in order for it to be valid and counted as a religious act of worship, and that's the wudu, then it has to be with an intention that distinguishes it from something that is not an act of worship. That's just some insight into the Islamic law. But basically, if you intend to perform purification only, then that is not a valid intention. And we'll conclude with this. The second integral is to wash what is apparent of the whole face once. So the second component of wudu is to wash what is apparent of the whole face once. The boundary of the face, lengthwise, is from the normal hairline for most people to the bottom of the chin where the jawbones meet. and widthwise from the tragus of one ear to the tragus of the other. Therefore, all that is within the boundary of the face, must be washed, including the hair and skin, but it is not an obligation to wash the inside of a man's thick beard, which is the hair grown on the chin. Nor is it an obligation to wash the inside of a man's thick hair grown on his lower jawbones. Rather, it is sufficient to wash the exterior part of the hair of both the chin and jawbones. If the hair of either was thin, then one is obligated to wash both the inside and the outer part of the hair. The hair is considered thick when one's skin is not apparent to the person conversing with him, and it is considered thin if the opposite is true. So what does this mean? This means that the second integral is to wash the face. So what is the face? This is a good way to show the importance of having the knowledge. Because let's say you ask an ignorant person, how do you make wudu? They're going to, most likely, include things, at least in the Shafi'i school, that are not integrals of wudu, that are recommended matters. You're going to say, wash your hands 3 times. You're going to say, rinse your mouth out 3 times. You're going to say, rinse your nose out 3 times. But if you ask that person, if you leave out washing your hands 3 times and washing your mouth 3 times and washing your nose 3 times, would my wudu be invalid? If they're ignorant, they won't know. But anyway, if they say you have to wash your face, which is correct, you have to wash your face, but then you ask them, what is the face? Because some ignorant people, what do when they put the water on their face? It's like they only get this part of their face. Like the part that is like symmetrical, like with their eyes and their mouth. They don't get right here. They don't get this part right here, because they don't know what the boundary of the face is. They just like wash the front of their face. Would that be valid? No. But that person, because he's ignorant, he's thinking that he's making wudu. And if his wudu is not valid, then what does that mean? That his prayer won't be valid. So imagine someone was in that situation for years. Why? Because they neglected to learn. Why? Because they read books on their own. Why? Because they didn't follow the proper steps, how you're supposed to. You have to learn from someone who learned from someone who learned from someone that connects you back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's the one who received the revelation. He's the one who taught the companions. And they're the ones who taught the followers of the companions. And they're the ones who taught the followers of the followers. And so on and so forth until reaching now. So it doesn't make sense for someone to do it on his own. When was the last time that you went to a doctor who just learned on his own? The first time that you do it will probably be the last time that you do it. Because he's gonna... And that still happens until today. Recently there was in the news, I forgot where, someone that was unlicensed was giving what they call the Brazilian injections, and the person died from it. Sounds like a horrible way to die, but that still happens, yani. And that's the worst that could happen, right? If somebody pretends to be a doctor and then they try to do some treatment on you, the worst that's going to happen is you're going to die. That's it. Or, you're going to go into a coma, or you're going to become like paralyzed or something, something like that. You're going to, lose an arm or whatever. You're going to go blind, right? But what about if the person, so that's in the case of like someone reading on their own and supposedly being a doctor on their own. What about the one who he makes a mistake in religion, in the creed? The worst that can happen is that they become a kafir and they're unaware, and they die and they go to hell forever. That's not the type of thing you want to risk. That's not the type of thing that you want to be reckless about. Just like you wouldn't be reckless about getting some sort of medical treatment from someone who's unqualified. Similarly, you wouldn't, and logically, you shouldn't get information from an unreliable source or from someone who's not qualified. Because the difference here is the difference between paradise and hellfire. Not the difference between like going blind or like dying because you got mistreated. Same example for a lawyer who reads books on their own and becomes a lawyer. Would you let that person represent you when your life is on the line and you're facing 25 to life? You're going to get the guy who just read books on his own? Or you're going to get the guy that, graduated from Harvard and he has, this track record and this credibility or whatever? You're going to get that guy. So, and what's the worst that could happen? If you get a lawyer that doesn't know what he's doing, worst that can happen, you're going to go to jail for the rest of your life. And that's it. But worst that can happen with someone who is unqualified in the religion and taking information from them, or doing it on your own, interpreting on your own, and reading books on your own, the worst that can happen is you become a kafir, and you die, and you don't even know that you're a kafir, and you die, and you go to hell forever. May Allah protect us. We ask Allah Ta'ala to make us die as pious Muslims, and we ask Allah Ta'ala to make our final words La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah